Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about a little bit of a hot topic that's happening in the real estate market, specifically in BC, and that's the new short-term rental legislation that has come into effect. And we're going to dive into what that actually looks like and our personal takes on the legislation as a whole, as well as how it can affect our local market. And go into detail on that. So do you want to start maybe talking about the new legislation and kind of what that's creating in BC?
Yeah, so the new legislation that's come out in BC is the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act. And essentially what it is I think what most people think it is that no more short-term rentals. And that's not really the case. Diving into, the publication from the British Columbia government, what it is you can short-term rent your primary residence, and you can short-term rent secondary suites and accessory suites. So basically what they're trying to do is take away the ability that people have to buy second homes that they do not live in to use them for short-term rentals. And essentially, I think I read 16,000 short-term rentals. They're hoping that some of those can get put back into the long-term rental, or homeowners as they're trying to deal with that issue. Anything over 10,000 people, the list of cities is quite long. Vancouver obviously being one of the biggest ones that does get affected by this, as well as Kelowna, Kamloops. There is a list on the British Columbia website. Parker will probably put that in this document and the link to it in the bottom of our video here, so that you can see exactly what we're talking about today. I don't necessarily agree with what's going on there, but having some clarification on, the type of property that BC is actually going after, or changing the legislation on it is important to understand, because that really determines, and I think it's probably part of our second part of the video, on how Canmore is affected by that, and not affected by it now, but if the same legislation were to come to Canmore, what would that look like here? So.
And it's important to note that there are 14 resort municipalities that are excluded from this ban. The popular one obviously being Whistler for BC. But again, anything under 10,000 is still eligible to do this. The issue, I think, is stemming from people who, for example, if you're an investor, let's say, and you choose to invest in real estate versus put your money into the stock markets, I think of little places like Salmon Arm, for example, that are now included in this ban. There's people who have invested their money into real estate to operate potentially a short-term rental that's allowing them to, live their life. It's no different than somebody putting 50 grand into a stock market or whatever that looks like. Overnight, their investment is completely cut down.
Right.
I mean, we saw in Victoria there was within 24 hours, 60 listings, 0 sales. So it's unfortunate for those people. And I don't know if they really took into consideration those types of people that are going to be affected. I mean, there's people who have these properties that allows them to live the lifestyle that they've created, that is completely taken away from them.
Yeah, that may be their job, right? It may be how they make a living.
Exactly. So that, to me, that's super unfortunate. I do see the issue with affordable housing and all of that stuff. I mean, we're seeing it across Canada, but I just don't know that this is the solution. I
would agree.
It's difficult, and time will tell kind of how it affects these people, but those are the people that I really ache for in this situation. It's just overnight, and it's just so.
Well, I think unfortunately is sometimes when governments start to change regulations, I'm not suggesting that they don't do their research and so on and so forth. There's more to it than just we're doing this for sure. But you have to, when you look at regulations, you have to look at can it help, first of all, the problem that we need addressed? Yes. Secondly, who does it affect?
Yeah.
And is it fair to affect them?
Yeah.
You know, I do understand there's a lot of, you know, with case in point, the new foreign buyer ban that came in.
Yeah.
Right? That limited foreign people from buying homes.
Yeah.
What I would like to see is the data.
Yeah.
How did that foreign buyer ban affect sale price? Did it?
Yeah.
Did it affect things dropping? Did it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't seen the data around that. Maybe that's something we can look into. Yeah. My point is, they put in the foreign buyer ban to create, you know, more affordable housing.
Yeah.
Did it do that? Where's the data?
Yeah.
And then, you know, instantly it goes to this. So my thought process is okay, it didn't do what they wanted it to do.
Yeah.
You know, so
especially here in Calgary and arguably Vancouver, Victoria, like all these places are still booming with real estate. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think the Vancouver and the Toronto market have been off a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see if that correlation reflects that data.
Yeah.
You know, and then the 1% underused housing tax that's also been implemented.
Yeah.
How is that affecting things?
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what this does. I mean, initially, you look at it, 60 listings in Victoria alone, 0 sales. Now, before, if you would have had a listing in Victoria come up,
it'd be arguably pretty quick, I would assume. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're not necessarily 100% in the market. So
yeah.
They're talking about fines from $2,000 to $50,000. Again, we'll link the document below so you can have a look at it. I think what people probably looking at our channel are going to be interested in is how and what will this affect us here in Canmore? If the same legislation, keeping in mind governments can change and tweak things,
provincials
we just want to give you a perspective of that particular legislation, if it was to get put in place in Alberta, what that would look like.
Yeah.
So maybe you can start off with that.
Sure. So I think the biggest thing as a whole to just maybe digest before we get into that is I'm not exactly sure something like this legislation coming into Alberta and this is just my perspective, it 100% could come into the province, but I don't see Alberta as having an Airbnb issue that in turn is causing unaffordable housing. Like, we don't, besides Canmore, Banff, which there's no short-term rentals, there's not a whole lot of resort destination places where people are coming to travel to, right? Calgary's very different from Vancouver in that sense. So I know Calgary's one of the most affordable cities in Canada to live in. So I don't see Airbnb being an issue to create more affordable housing for people in Alberta as a whole.
Right.
Moving into Canmore specifically, and this is where it's kind of unique, is essentially based on what we have discussed is Canmore has almost already adopted this in a way, because so basically Canmore has two, let's call them zonings, that allow for short-term rentals. So they already have very strict restrictions on what can and cannot be used as a short-term rental or an Airbnb, which is good because if it was to a certain extent. But my opinion is they've already adopted this because otherwise we would have potentially that issue that they're experiencing where people would be buying single-family homes. Majority of the town would be operating as an Airbnb if you could rent out a whole house, for example.
So I think what's important to know is in BC, the law has come out on residential property. Yeah. Right? In Canmore, we don't have a residential property designation for Airbnb. It's not allowed. Yeah. It's in a commercial zoning.
Correct.
So these types of units in Canmore, the short-term rental, while there's some tourist home things that are going on, and the town is actually trying to change and deal with that right now. Not sure what that's going to look like, but they're playing with that a little bit. So basically what the town did is they created commercial zoning, like hotels, those types of things, where short-term rentals were allowed. So the particular places in the town of Canmore are not zoned for residential anyways. So it's not like those particular properties would create short or long-term opportunities for people to buy or rent. So they're outside of that. Basically what they've done is created this same kind of animal. They just made it where short-term's available, but it isn't inside the residential property.
And that directly correlates to our zoning, which most of these short-term rentals are zoned hotel condo, which is strictly the usage for short-term rentals, 30 consecutive days or less.
Yes.
You can't live there, and you can't rent them out long-term anyways, so that's why they're zoned that way. So if there's no way those are going to become overturned, because people can't, based on the zoning, you can't occupy the space as a primary residence as it is. So Canmore has almost already thought of this in advance.
No, I'm not suggesting we don't have a affordable housing issue in Canmore.
100%.
I mean, we've talked about that, and I believe that there has to be a solution for that. But inside a commercial short-term rental, is probably not that solution. And I do believe that, you know, people in Canmore and, you know, the municipality and the town are genuinely looking at options and trying to figure out what would work. My recommendation is that they talk to a lot of people. Right? Don't just make a big decision on a small amount of data. So
And I think with the Three Sisters development being approved now and that whole court case getting settled and stuff, as much as there are people, and there's two opinions, and not one person is right and not one person is wrong.
Right.
But I do think that with that development being approved, the amount of housing that it's going to create, the commercial space that's going to be up there to ease the pressure off of the downtown core, you know, meaning the grocery stores and stuff like that, and the potential for creating some affordable housing up there, you know, and what that looks like, we're not sure, but I think it's ultimately going to benefit each individual in a certain way. You know, it may affect them in a way as well, but I think as a whole, it's going to bring Canmore up. In my opinion.
I mean, I'm of the same accord, and I know there's other people that, you know, have different opinions, and your opinions are all important.
It is, 100%.
You know, I think that's really what's missing in society, to be honest with you, is the ability to debate and listen to each other and, you know, in the end, try and make the best decision moving forward. And one side's always this way, and one side seems to always be this way. So, I mean, I think both you and I are on the same page. Maybe because we're in real estate, I don't know.
I don't think so. I think if I was in a different sector, I think it would be good. It's going to be good for people who operate businesses here.
I agree.
It's going to be good for all those people. I really do think that everyone is going to benefit some way from it.
And I think if you look at Canmore as a whole, if you were here a long time ago,
it's changed.
You maybe have the right to say, oh, the growth is, but at some point, you were here where there was no housing, no building, and that got developed, and you were okay with that. And so I just think that we all have to look at it, you know, collectively. But to stand there and say that shouldn't happen when you're maybe living in a property that was in the same situation 10 or 15 years ago, it's kind of hypocritical in my mind. So I just, I don't know. I think we're getting a little bit off topic on that part of it. We didn't want this to be a Three Sisters thing, but I do agree with you. I think that Three Sisters can be a benefit. I mean, it needs to be done right. For sure. I agree. But I think that it can be a benefit.
I mean, I think where this ties into our discussion today is that it revolves around tourism, because tourism is what 90% of people's businesses in Canmore revolve around it,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Everyone benefits from tourism.
Yeah.
So reverting back to the short-term rental stuff, I think for people who own property here, as it stands today, if this was to come in Alberta,
Yeah.
word for word, the exact same. From my understanding, it's actually potentially benefiting people who are already owners
Yeah.
of these properties in Canmore.
Correct.
And whether people like it or not, I do think that there is going to be more people who are going to look at investing in the specific short-term rental designation, commercial zone properties in Canmore,
Yeah.
which in turn I think is a good thing. It's going to bring more money into our town. And I mean, it's not like, yes, we're having these new complexes come up, but it's not like we have a ton of land that's commercial that can change into hotel condos. I understand that it's changed a lot, from even 10 years ago.
Yeah,
And,
it has.
People, whether they like that or not, it's happened. But the reality is I think that people who own or are looking to invest in Canmore, as of right now, I think it's a safe place.
I agree. It'll be interesting to see what the banks.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be another thing, is the financing side.
What will financing look like around all of this? Will they tighten? I mean, banks have tightened up anyways. Not necessarily banks, but lending money and interest rates and stress tests and all that stuff is obviously less affordable than it was.
Yeah.
But I wonder if the banks will even tighten up more on the short-term rental stuff.
I think they will. I mean, they're probably at a risk of, and I would say that most of the people that are affected by this who own these properties in Vancouver and stuff, like they have finances, I would assume. I mean, those properties aren't cheap.
No, agree.
But that doesn't mean that they're not affected. So I do think that banks have potentially incurred more risk from this legislation coming into effect.
Cool.
That, like you said, might result in, tightening up on it. And maybe there's banks that go, we're not lending on this stuff anymore because we can't afford to, or we don't want to incur that risk. And like you said, financing is becoming a little bit more difficult on these properties. And it's important on that topic to connect with us because we do have specific lenders that are experienced with these properties in Canmore. And it arguably can be the deciding factor of you being able to get your property.
Right.
So that's a good thing if you're looking at this market, to make sure you reach out, because it does keep deals together and it does allow people to purchase things.
Right. Now, this legislation does not deter people from renting their properties long term. I think that's actually the goal.
Yes.
Is to either get them back into the market for sale for somebody to buy, or having them rent them out long term.
Yeah.
Right. And which, I mean, you and I both know it still is a good model.
Yeah.
There's lots of people that do it.
Yeah.
And but it's not as good as the short-term rental market, especially in places like Vancouver, Destination, Kelowna, those types of places. So, I think it's important to look at all angles. But we just wanted to give you, a little bit of a synopsis of what we're seeing, because I'm sure you're the same as us. When it came out, we were like, "What?
Yeah.
How's that going to affect us here?"
Yeah.
And then in reading the data and looking at the information, it was a little bit more clear on what it was.
Yeah.
And if that same legislation came to here, it wouldn't affect us as a whole.
Yeah.
Overall.
I mean, I think the purpose of this video was to create an educational conversation for our current clients who do own these types of properties, for people who are looking to buy into these properties, or anyone that's curious in Canmore, or even just this topic of conversation.
Yeah.
So we would actually really love to hear your guys' thoughts on what you think of this and how you think it's going to affect either BC or Alberta. We'd love to get a discussion going. We really do enjoy communicating with people on topics revolving real estate. So drop a comment down below. And if you would like and subscribe to the channel, that would be so greatly appreciated. We really do love creating these types of videos for you, and ultimately sharing our opinions and also hearing the voices of others. So
I think it's important to, with the comments, we're open to anything, obviously, but what we want is to have constructive criticism or discussion.
yeah.
We're not looking at getting into a heated argument with people over you want this and we want that, or anything like that. We're open to different comments about discussions, and you know, I think that's important.
And I think we're very reasonable people where we do see both sides of these you know, legislations or developments and all that stuff. We understand how it does affect locals that, you know, maybe aren't for it, and we also understand certain things that are benefits, and that's where I think the discussion aspect is so important, because it allows maybe people who aren't against it to see some of the people's reasonings for why it is potentially beneficial, and vice versa. So ultimately, we just wanted to come on here and just have a little bit of a conversation with you. It's been a talk about the news and lots of discussions within our brokerage and our office. We've had clients connect with us about it and ask for our opinions. So hopefully this is educational, and I think that kind of...
Just one last point. The University of Calgary is doing a survey right now on how short-term rentals are being affected, or not being affected. What about short-term rentals in Calgary?
Yeah.
So I think that'll be interesting to see what happens, what comes out of that.
Yeah.
You know, again, maybe we'll put that link in if you want to go on and give your opinion on the survey. That would probably be beneficial as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to coming at you with some new content.